It's Joe, your faithful host and co-founder of Command Control Power, the longest-running Apple consulting podcast. In case you missed our birthday, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary this summer. For 10 years, we've been getting together each and every week to bring you epic tales of tech support and business management, and I'm pretty sure we've saved a lot of people a ton of time by sharing our struggles and solutions. Starting now, we're shifting our focus to the Patreon community. That means the newest shows will be posted primarily on Patreon. How do you get the latest episodes? Visit commandcontrolpower.com and click on support. Pledge monthly, and you can instantly subscribe to the weekly patron-only episodes right in your favorite podcast app. If you already support us on Patreon, log in there to get your special link and subscribe to the patron-only show so you don't miss anything. Here on the public show, we'll be featuring classic episodes hand-selected for you from our catalog of over 500 episodes, along with occasional new episodes too. And remember, we're regularly releasing new content on Patreon, where you can join our community of supporters starting at just $15 per month, giving you access to the freshest content. We feature dozens of exclusive shows on Patreon where we speak a little more freely about how we make business decisions, navigate client relationships, manage our employees, and sometimes deal with mistakes and difficulties too. Plus, as a patron, you receive access to our entire back catalog where you can revisit classic episodes and learn from colleagues we've interviewed who've shared their own best practices. Visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support to pledge monthly on Patreon. We'd really appreciate your support, and we're confident your business will benefit from the wisdom of the community we've gathered there. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy this episode of Command Control Power. We are very pleased to welcome Tom Bridge back to the show. Tom is partner at Technolutionary, based in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us, Tom.
Hey, guys. Thanks so much for having me on.
So it was Jerry's idea to invite you back on to talk about a topic you've been mentioning in your TechnoBits newsletter, which, by the way, we highly recommend our listeners check out. What's the link, Tom?
It's tinyletter.com/technobits, all one word.
Awesome. And we'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. But you mentioned a couple, I think starting with a couple of newsletters back, that you attempted to go sort of iPad Pro only for a couple of trips, I guess, that you had taken. And you've been documenting your progress in the newsletter. And that's one of the reasons we recommend checking that out. But we thought maybe we could discuss that a little bit with you and get the latest and greatest on how that's working out for you. So how has it been going?
So it's been going pretty good. It's a lot to get used to all at once. It's like you've spent your entire life driving a sports car with an automatic transmission, and now you are driving a sports car with a manual transmission. And so you have to take a few extra steps to get up to speed. And it's been really marvelous. And
which one did you buy, Tom?
I bought an iPad Pro. I've got a couple different cases at this point because I figure, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I should test it out. We've got clients all the time that are asking us, hey, can we think about moving to iPads for day-to-day work? And I'd be like, I don't know. I've only got this iPad Air that I've got at home that I use for reading my Kindle at night. So this is my first real foray into using my iPad as my primary computer.
And did you get the 64 gig or the 128? And did you get it with cellular as well?
I chose not to get it with cellular. I went ahead and went with the 128 gig Wi-Fi only model. So I think list is like $949 on that, I think. Mm-hmm. And I also bought an Apple Pencil. I bought the Apple Smart Keyboard cover. And then I ended up going out and buying the Logitech Create case as well. Switching back and forth between those two cases at this point, I'm not sure which one I like better. I like typing better on the Smart Keyboard cover, which is the one from Apple. I don't like typing on the one from Logitech as much. I feel like the keys are just, the key travel is just a little bit weird. But the Logitech case has a bunch of like extra feature buttons. So it's got a lock the screen button, a home button, volume controls, search button, that kind of stuff. So you can do more natively with just a single touch of the key with the Logitech keyboard. And it also helps that it's backlit. So if you're working in dim spaces, that has a backlight on it as opposed to the Apple Smart Keyboard cover, which doesn't. The Smart Keyboard cover has a keyboard travel that's approximately the same as the new MacBook. So it's very narrow key travel. And for about the first like 3 or 4 days, you feel like you're pounding through the desk. Or at least if you type like I do, you feel that way. You're just like, oh my God, my fingers are like sticking through the table. but you develop a lighter touch over time, which is actually probably better for your wrists anyway. But overall, it's been really good. The experience has been solid. I've ended up spending a fair amount of money in the App Store, looking for apps that are going to solve specific problems for me. And I found several that I really just can't live without now. One of those is called Prompt, and it's from the guys at Panic, and it's an SSH client. So you can SSH into pretty much anything with that, whether or not you need full SSH keys. Or if you just want to use your user credentials, you've got full access that way. And you can create shortcuts to different boxes so that it's almost like a terminal connection that has like a favorites bar. So if you're using like iTerm or something like that on the Mac, it's a good partner for that. And that's made by Panic. They're out of Portland, Oregon.
Tom, was there something on the Apple Smart keyboard cover that caused you to want to look elsewhere, or was that you just kind of wanted to check out, do a little bit of a survey of the accessories that are out there?
I actually bought the Logitech. I had the Logitech first. I had bought the Apple keyboard cover and the pencil with the iPad, but then because supply was so constrained, it was going to be 4 to 5 weeks until they arrived. So I needed to create to kind of like get a keyboard in there because, as much as I love the device on its own, it really, really needs a keyboard if it's going to be your primary driver. There's just something about the way in which you have to hold it on your lap to make, the keyboard work on the glass. And while it's functional in tight spaces, it's certainly not ideal.
Better to have that standard form factor to be able to type a little bit more easily.
Absolutely. And, with both cases, they've got props so that you can prop the screen at about what you'd normally consider a laptop angle, so that, it'll actually hold the screen in that position so that it's at a more natural space.
And the Logitech, though, makes it a lot more chunkier and heavier, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it's a lot thicker with the Logitech case.
Because of all the electronics that are built into it.
It's not so much that there's electronics, it's that there's an actual case. The Smart keyboard cover is very minimalist, and it doesn't protect the back of the device at all. It only just covers the front of the display. Whereas the Logitech, it's actually something that you slide into a groove on the Logitech case, and then it protects the back and the front of the iPad.
Doesn't Apple also make like a smart case as well that, to like a kind of second half of that keyboard cover?
For the iPad Air, they do. Not for the Pro yet.
Interesting. Okay.
So assuming for a moment that you're going to use this exclusively to do your IT support work with, like take us through that process. I mean, is it, obviously some of the things that the iPad Pro is bringing to the table is obviously the pen and the much faster processor. Are those game changers in terms of you being more efficient than trying to tackle this, let's say, with an iPad Air?
Sure. And I think that generally, I think it's an absolutely better than using an iPad Air, if only for the processor and the graphics that are associated with it. The screen is much more pixel dense in the iPad Pro than the iPad Air 2. And just in terms of the physical size of the image that you're looking at, both in terms of pixel count and in terms of screen size. So that is part of what I really love about using the iPad Pro on a day-to-day basis instead of the Air that I have. The Air feels almost too small. If you've ever used an 11-inch MacBook, or MacBook Air rather, the 11-inch MacBook Air, it just feels wrong to me because it's just too small.
Joe and I have been using one for about 3 years.
Finally, someone on my side.
I am planning on upgrading, though, to that point, Tom. I am planning on upgrading to the MacBook Pro 13-inch, finally.
You're getting older, Joe, and the screens get,
I need the Retina display, exactly.
The 11-inch MacBook Air is my wife's machine of choice. She wants small and portable. I get that. I would much rather carry an extra half pound and get a screen that I can read. It's funny. I finally went to the eye doctor about 3 months ago, and he was like, "Hey, you really need glasses." And I was like, "Gee, I wonder why." I spend all my days tiny screens right up near my face.
So this is great that you have that iPad Air that you can compare it to, and you've got them both there and you're looking at them and you're able to work with both. And you say that this extra screen real estate isn't just a luxury, it's almost like a necessity if you're going to use it as a business tool.
Yeah, if you're going to use it as a business tool, you're going to need something substantial to look at, to write on, to compose with. especially if you want to use the side-by-side mode. I've used the side-by-side mode once or twice in the Air 2, and it always felt like I had the worst of two possible worlds there. And it is that I have all of my data side by side, and I can't read any of it. With the iPad Pro, it's like you have two full-size iPad Airs. And you do in terms of like pixel count.
Wow.
That's amazing.
That's amazing to me. And that's what I love about it. One of the interesting things that caught my eye early on in looking at the iPad Pro was that it's the first iPad that Apple displays using in a landscape mode. If you go to the Apple Store or pretty much any Apple retailer, you're going to see the devices oriented in portrait mode all of the time. I think that's bananas. I prefer the iPad to be on landscape mode, generally speaking. And I always felt that the portrait mode was really nice if I was doing, some reading. But anything else, it just felt unnatural to me. I'm so used to that, 4:3, 16:9, aspect ratio for everything that I do, that using it in portrait mode just felt wrong.
So funny that you bring that up. I mean, it just made me realize how true that is. I didn't even notice that's the way they market that one in particular in comparison to the other models.
And if you go to the Apple Store, you'll see the Pro, and all of them are in landscape mode all the time. They've probably got one or two set up with the keyboard cover. They've got one or two set up next to an Apple Pencil, and then they've got one like on a leash that they can move around a little bit. And all of them will be in landscape mode. And it's a phenomenal landscape device. The side-by-side mode is really, really great. And I was just using it the other day to do my expenses. And I was reviewing, QuickBooks in one screen and an Excel spreadsheet with all of my expenses in the other.
So Tom, just on that point, you've got, QuickBooks and Excel. For somebody who, I don't know what your setup was like, leading up to this kind of migration, but like I've got QuickBooks Pro on my Mac server and I'm using multi-user access, to have multiple Macs access the QuickBooks data. Does this necessitate, going to QuickBooks Online, for example, just take that one case?
Well, it's interesting. We went to QuickBooks Online for an entirely separate reason, mostly due to our timekeeping, 9 months ago now. And so we've been on QuickBooks Online for since before I've had the Pro. While I'm not in love with the QuickBooks Online version of the QuickBooks product, especially as it's rapidly changed to be less useful on the mobile platform, it's at least something that I can use and that keeps my partner and I and our accountant all on the same page, because that's the really important part.
So that's kind of a prerequisite is to, the more cloud services you use, the easier this transition would be, I think, whereas the same example with Excel, if you've got files, in just on your Mac locally or on your Mac server, shared out over AFP, you've got to make some adjustments to be able to have access to those on your iPad.
Absolutely. And one of the things you've really got to be ready for in terms of how the iOS ecosystem operates is that you've really got to be aware what the document handler ecosystem does in that space. So, I mean, we rely on Dropbox very, very heavily in my day-to-day operations. My business partner and I share a set of documents on our Dropbox that, if one of us makes a change, it gets notated there. And so if I don't have access to Dropbox in something, I'm having a real bad day. But Office's Dropbox integration is awesome. The way that has worked out together has just been stellar.
And what do you do for secure documents? Do you use something like Monkeybox, Luis Geraldo's product? How do you distribute on a mobile device like you're using client data?
Client data, we feel comfortable with Dropbox in terms of what they're offering because it's stored encrypted at rest, and it's encrypted in transit. And that's the most important part of things. We don't store passwords in the Dropbox. Passwords are essentially learned, memorized, and then destroyed.
Wow, that's a new technique. I hadn't heard of anybody doing that.
It's a little bit. It may not be ideal for some folks. It has certainly served us very well.
Lived by the sword, died by the sword.
A little bit, yes. Now, I'm not going to say that I don't keep encrypted notes files someplace else for random 80-character passwords that some router uses, some Cisco router requires. But I do say, generally speaking, we work off of a password scheme. and that tends to work well for us. We're looking at Monkeybox for the long term, but it's not something that we've adapted to yet.
Now, you've mentioned a couple of apps that you already use, like Dropbox and Office, and things that you spent a decent amount of money at the App Store, obviously. But would you say there are any specific major limitations in this changeover from a full-fledged laptop to this iPad Pro? Is there has there been any real sticking points that have really stopped the show for you?
Oh, sure. And it's all about like figuring out the creative way around a problem, right? For example, how many times a week do we get zip files in our email, right? That's got like a zip file with a whole bunch of documents inside of it. And oh crap, how the hell do I deal with that on iOS? The answer is you actually need like an FTP client with local file system access to do that. And figuring out that process has been a real bear, but there are some really good guideposts for this. And there are two guys in specific I want to talk about, and that's Federico Vitici of MacStories.net and Fraser Spears of the Cedar School. And the two of those guys have been doing essentially iPad as primary machine for many years now. I mean, going back to the original iPad. For those of you who don't know who Fraser is, he runs the IT operations for the Cedar School in Scotland, and they are one of the very, very, very first one-to-one programs going back all the way to the iPad 1.
Yeah, I think he was actually technically like the very first one-to-one. He designed and implemented it.
Yep, back in the days before there were any of the tools that we would rely on now. And Fraser's an incredibly kind and well-versed individual who shares a lot of what he learns too. And that has been incredible. And if you haven't read Federico Vitici's, for example, his review of the iPad Air 2 is something on the lines of like 40,000 words.
Yeah, pretty comprehensive.
Wow. It's pretty comprehensive, and there is a John Syracuse-esque nature to his work, which I have really come to appreciate. And the two of them have teamed up on a podcast on the Relay FM network called Canvas, which is going to be focused all about using iOS to do your day-to-day job. And their first episode was on how do you deal with some of the more difficult problems, and the second episode was on the document ecosystem.
Didn't they also do one, I think, on actually how they produce the show using iPads only?
I don't think they're producing the show using iPads only currently.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that Federico still uses his MacBook Air for audio recording because there's really no great way to do. I mean, you can do some of that with a couple of the tools that are out there, but for example, there's no like good microphone interface for the iPad yet.
Well, there's also no like audio routing to speak of. I think there's an app that you can, there's like Audio Bus or something like that where you can, if the app supports it, you can, shuttle audio out from one app and into another one, but there's no sort of like workflow to, record a Skype conversation and broadcast it live, all from one device. There's just no way to do it.
Right.
But that's a limitation of Skype, and that's I've heard recent discussions about this, Joe, and that's what everybody's waiting on is for Skype to open this up so we can record it. There's actually a new app that's come out called Loopback.
Yeah.
Put out by the guys at Rogue Amoeba, and there's a great podcast editing app that I haven't used personally. I've heard good things about. We'll put the in our show notes. It's called Ferrite, and that's one that Jason Snell has mentioned.
Yep, and Jason Snell has been doing a bunch of editing in the iPad space using Ferrite, but it's still not a great place to do the recording from. And most of the times they end up recording on individual Macs using USB microphones or a USB to XLR interface, and then capturing the audio and then moving those files manually over to the iOS side.
Right.
So a lot of this sort of the machinations here prompts a question. Why? Why do people do this? Especially if, Fraser and Federico going back as you said, as far as they did several years, being iPad only before it was cool. Before it was even convenient to the extent that it is now. So what's your main motivation, Tom, in exploring this besides just knowing about it? As you mentioned, for your clients and having that experience.
Sometimes it's can I do it? And sometimes it's a place where this tool seems to have almost everything I love and none of the drawbacks that I hate. Why don't I just jump in and see if I can do it? And for me, it's about focus. And I love my laptop, but when I've got my laptop open, I've got Slack going, and I'm in 5 different Slack networks. I have Twitter going, Facebook in a tab someplace, ARD going on, and I may have a remote session going. I'll have 5 different email accounts that are going on, as well as, instant message and, whatever else I'm doing. That's an incredibly distracting way to work. It's a great way to get a lot of information, but it's not a great way to focus. And one of the things that I've really appreciated about the iPad so far is the way in which it deals with multitasking, so that you are more focused while you are doing the multitasking, because you've got 2 apps. They are side by side in either 3/4, 1/4, or half and half. And you are just working with the data. You might get an alert up at the top of the screen, but I will frequently put my iPad in do not disturb mode so that I get no alerts at all, and it's a focus tool. And maybe if I get a phone call, my phone rings, my watch buzzes me out of that zone that I'm in, but I love the focus that it provides and that it enforces on my workflow.
So could you achieve something similar by just using the Mac in a more kind of single window mode, like
Sure.
full screen apps? And I mean, it doesn't impose that same restriction, so that you'd still have to kind of be self-disciplined. But would that get you closer to that more focused workflow? Or
so it's funny. One of the things I learned about how I learn and how I operate over the past 15 years is that if I can circumvent my own restrictions, I sometimes will.
Right.
And it's not a matter of discipline. It's not a matter of my learning ability. It's more a matter of how I interface with information technology. And not everybody's like that. And some people can be, put themselves in a focus window and, full screen their app and just pound it all out. And sometimes if I'm on the Mac, I can do that too. Sometimes if I'm having a bit of an ADD day, I can't. And I will keep responding to the stimuli of alerts, be they emails that come in from important clients or instant messages or anything like that. I'm kind of enjoying being free of that on the iPad platform. And, it's a place where I don't do this all the time. And but when I'm writing proposals for clients, when, we've just had that initial first meeting, to have the focus opportunity to kind of dive deep on that proposal and be undistracted is marvelous. It is absolutely marvelous. And knowing that I can rely on my safety net of the iPhone and alerts and things like that that I can use to give that focus back to myself, so that I can better guard my focus and better guard my expression. Hey man, that's money well spent.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate because I have had those same kind of focus sessions, going to the coffee shop and just with the iPad and just, digging into some emails. And sometimes things are a little bit more cumbersome, not being able to easily command tab from one place to another and, grab some text and paste it. And, I know all the formatting shortcuts and stuff like that. And that I don't have those same shortcuts and things like that I would have on the Mac. But
so hold the phone.
Yeah.
Because a lot of those things actually still work on the iPad if you're using them with the keyboard case. There is a brand new switcher in iOS 9, that responds to Apple Tab. And the first time I did that and saw the, Mac OS 10 style app switcher, I just about lost it. I thought that was the coolest thing since sliced bread. I was like, holy crap, actually. This is great. This is a huge productivity bump that if I need to get quickly between Mail and Safari or Mail and remote desktop or screens or something like that, I can. And I can do the copy paste shortcuts and things like that.
Sure.
It's not there's a lot of muscle memory that you have to relearn. The dumbest one, and I'm going to laugh at myself for doing this, is that after a day of working on the iPad Pro, I kept wanting the screen on my MacBook Pro to respond to touch.
I've heard that before too.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny.
And I was not expecting that.
I'll sometimes reach out to touch a word in a just a physical book that I'm reading. I'll just almost It's like my instinct is to reach out to like define this word, and I'm like, God, the book's broken. What's wrong with this thing? But I don't quite get that far. But the instinct is there, so I can totally see getting used to that.
Oh man, sounds like I'll be just as ADD as I ever was with Command Tab being available. Now I'm screwed.
That's true.
It's one of those things that what you only have when you need, because you still can change where your focus is going, but because you're not really living full time in every app at once, it's actually pretty good. It feels pretty good.
I am envious of this, Tom, but it is indeed an expensive experiment, and if we can call it that.
Sure.
Because you have this unique perspective of being an IT professional that Federico and Fraser Spears can't bring to the table. So for us, when we're out there in the field or whatever, where the rubber meets the road is being able to VNC into a client. So tell us about some of those tools besides Prompt 2 that you use.
So I'm using Screens from Adovia, and I'm using Microsoft's Remote Desktop, because we do support a few Windows servers here and there, and a couple of Windows VMs that live on Macs at our clients. And both of those, they support a couple of concepts that you really need. We all know and love, we all know and tolerate Apple Remote Desktop. And it maintains a database of every machine that we've ever remoted into. So does Screens. So does Microsoft Remote Desktop. Remote Desktop is free. Screens is a little more expensive. I want to say it's $8 or $10. Might be as much as $20. I'd need to go back and look at my receipts. I bought that one a long time ago.
Now, with Screens, are you using the Helper app on the client side?
No, I'm not. Okay. So the biggest single challenge that I've had to adapt to in moving to the iPad is moving my VPN connections. Because, I know that probably like you guys, you've probably got, 15 or 20 PPTP VPNs, a couple of SSL VPNs, a couple of IPsec VPNs.
It's possible.
You've got to spend time in. And, we're happy Carrio Control guys here at Technolutionary, and we think the product is really top drawer. But out of the box, it doesn't, it doesn't turn on the IPsec VPN. So essentially, once I realized that I was going to be in a space where I'd have to do that every day, I had to go through every one of my Carrio Connect or Control VPNs and turn on the IPsec VPN, and then create like a profile to dump on my Mac or to dump on my iOS device to allow VPN into that network. So that was the single longest part of the process, and I'm still not done. I'm probably about 75% of the way done at this point.
Okay, so the big question here is, Joe, that script that you use to export VPNs, can you tailor that to bring it into the iPad?
Oh, man. Well, it ends up spitting out those .network connect file. So in theory, that could be then converted somehow to a mobile config file, I guess. But Tom, you were experimenting a little bit with some method of doing this. You had something on GitHub, I think.
I haven't done it yet. What I'm thinking about writing at this point is kind of common. What I'm trying to figure out is a good way to do this. And yes, I have bookmarked your export VPN connections screen. And what I'm thinking about actually doing is setting up a private GitHub repository for myself. So that's a repo that I can get to, but that no one else can get to. Mm-hmm. And that I can then store VPN mobile config files for every site that we manage there, so that we can put that in source control, and when we make changes, have them change, and then download the new files and stuff like that. That is part of my project for the long flight to London in 2 weeks. Speaking with Chris Daw of Wheelwrights, and the two of us are going to talk about Wi-Fi toolset for admins to use. The Mac Admins and Developers Conference, put on by the really nice guys at AMSYS. If you haven't seen AMSYS's website, they put out a huge amount of awesome material for Mac admins, including some training programs and stuff like that for the iOS devices. It's really great.
You don't use TeamViewer on your iPad Pro at all?
I do.
Okay. And that works very well for you. So that's one of the tools in your arsenal. So if you at Technolutionary were an army of one, would you take a family vacation, and once you get your iPad all tricked out, would you bring it with you and not rely on your MacBook Pro at all?
So let me tell you what I've done to cheat a little bit, because I think it's really important that you be able to cheat death like this. Because, I mean, that's what it is at this point. If you get caught someplace with only your iPad and you can't help your client, that's probably death for your relationship with them, right? I mean, that's the world that we live in, right? Because, I mean, if you can't do it, they're going to find somebody who can.
Well, you don't want to tell them that you don't have your computer with you. You just got an iPad.
Well, right. And so here's what I did. I've set up the very first VPN connection I set up was a VPN back to my house. I've got a static IP through the nice guys at RCN, and I built a VPN tunnel back to my house. And I've got a Mac Mini that sits on my network at home that has access to all of the documents, all of the tools, all of the VPN connections that my regular Mac does. And so if I really, really needed to, that's, it'd be a pretty desperate situation if I really needed that. But that would give me pretty much anything I needed to do.
That's a really good tip. I've used the same fail-safe system there when I've traveled with just an iPad before, or just an iPhone or whatever on a shorter trip. And some of the examples are like if you have to get a password out of keychain access or something like that.
Exactly.
It's really, really nice to have that, and you can definitely sleep a little bit easier.
Although there's a note that needs to be attached to this, and Apple's got a new Keybase article that I believe affects 10.11.2 and later. If you're using iCloud Keychain, there are certain keys that will not display their results. I've
noticed that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll find that Keybase and send it on over for the show notes.
Probably a good feature in the interest of security. I'm sure there's a reason for that, but yeah, that can definitely be a little bit of a stumbling block. What about just recoverability? Like if you travel with just an iPad, certainly you could have iCloud backing it up. The whole point is to leave your Mac behind, though, so you're not going to do any local, backups to a Mac. And what happens if your iPad just won't turn on and you need to go to the Apple Store and replace it and restore from an iCloud backup? There are certain things that don't come in, right? And I'm thinking that VPN configurations are one of those.
Yes, you are correct. It is a place. That's exactly why I was thinking about putting those connections in private source.
That makes sense. Then you just have the ability to just re-add them pretty easily.
Exactly.
That would be I'd be interested to know the results of that kind of a test of just like, okay, now that I've got it all set up and backed up, what if I want to restore from backup to a brand new device, and how much of this needs to be, how many passwords do I need to remember to be able to get the initial configuration done, and then what's left out of that initial backup restoration.
I think I have my homework for this week.
Nice. Excellent. Yeah, that would be an awesome exercise. But in general, it's been so great that you've been sharing this stuff, with your subscribers to TechnoBits. And once again, we do recommend everyone go to tinyletter.com/technobits to sign up. It's a great newsletter and a great way of giving back to the community. So thanks again, Tom, for doing that. Have a great conference. When are you traveling to London?
I believe I leave the Saturday the 6th, and a group of us are actually going to stop off in Iceland for a couple of days and check that out on the way.
Great idea. Very cool. Well, enjoy, and we look forward to a full report in the newsletter when you get back.
Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks again, Tom.
So as I mentioned in a previous episode, I had an issue with my Synology, and to make a long story short, they were very helpful in giving me a quick RMA, and my new Synology came in within a few days. I mean, I'm still amazed as to how quick that whole process was. I mean, I had some downtime, obviously, but just their support and their availability and everything like that. So to make a long story short, I got my new Synology. I put my drives in there. It popped up in find.synology.com in my web browser. And it prompted me to say, hey, we know you have some data on here. Do you want to try and migrate your settings or set up a brand new Synology while still preserving your data? So I tried migrating my settings, and that didn't work, but I kind of didn't expect it to, because that's what started this whole process in the first place. So in my worst case scenario, I still had my data. So all I did was set up as a new Synology and set up my new disk station with my static IP and my new admin credentials. And probably within a half an hour, I'm back up and running, connecting via the network to all my data. And I was just kind of blown away, considering all the times that you may deal with any kind of manufacturer or developer that, whether it's be on the software side or hardware side, it can be a very troublesome time to get that process going, and especially if there's an RMA involved. But the follow-up on this was just all good news for me. And I already shipped out my other one, and that's all ready to go. So I'm very, very psyched that all went through very happily, because when it comes time that might happen to a client, I have that confidence kind of built in already, saying, all right, I know what to expect, and these guys can handle the task.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, that's awesome. Glad that worked out.
Yeah, I mean, it can be. I mean, you guys know. I mean, you've had difficulties with a number of different hardware or software vendors, and it can be a pain.
Absolutely. Yeah, they made it as smooth as possible. I mean, nobody can guarantee hardware is going to work 100% of the time, but right. It's what you do. When it doesn't work. I think you might have mentioned that last time, but that's exactly the point here, and they proved themselves. That's fantastic.
Right. Just talking about swapping out hardware, we're trying to go through a hardware exchange for Dell SonicWall that we got reinstated with the warranty. Two of the things that my client needed to do before they would agree to replace the SonicWall, because we were intermittently losing Ethernet connection. And one of them, they asked them to buy a dumb switch and put the switch between the modem and the SonicWall to see if that resolved the problem.
That's a weird idea.
It's a very weird idea, but we've been touch and go back and forth with the client, and I haven't gotten an ultimate yay or nay on that, but I'd be surprised if it actually resolved it.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like they're just trying to buy more time or something.
Right. We don't have any in stock right now, so let's give them this option.
Right.
But it's so true, that you have to jump through all these hoops, like Sam was saying, before they can actually greenlight something, and it really speaks volumes that Synology was so seamless.
Yeah,
I was kind of surprised, to be honest with you. I'm like, really? That's it? I'm like, okay. This week has been a number of different issues. That was on the positive side, but I had some strange stuff happening this week. It started with one of my clients. I got the phone call that said, "Hey, we can't log into our computers," and they're using Open Directory, and they're bound to the server, and that's how they authenticate. So I knew immediately something's going on with the OD server. So I remote in. I'm thinking, all right, it could be down, and that's bad news for me. But I go in, and actually the Open Directory master is up. But I have a secondary server that's an Open Directory replica. And I went in there, and these are running Yosemite server 4, I believe. And all the replication is gone. Like, no users and groups exist on the replica anymore. There's no error. There's nothing that shows me something went wrong. They're just gone.
Wow.
So, I mean, thankfully, this is just replication. But still, I couldn't figure out for the life of me what happened. And obviously, I'm remoting in, and I'm trying to work quickly. So I didn't dig too much deeper yet. But the easy resolution was essentially to initiate replication again in Open Directory. It picked up the users and groups. And since those permissions still take hold on all the files and folders that were on there, that was no problem. So the resolution was fairly easy, but still kind of scared me that could just happen and just completely disappear with no indication as to why, at least obvious indication. You know what I mean?
That definitely sounds like Open Directory to me. But now just describe this again, Sam. So this was the replica, and was the replica what they were authenticating against, or?
Yeah, so right. So they were authenticating against the replica, and we were thinking immediately once we got the call that was the issue. And sure enough, it was. But I mean, it's just, I know all the jokes that we've made about Open Directory, so it should. I kind of thought about it. It's funny the things that happen during the week when you're like, oh man, I can't wait to talk to Joe and Jerry about this, because that's exactly what I was thinking. I'm kind of chuckling after it started working, going, all right, that was a nice one, but I can't wait to have a laugh about this on the show. And it was. Yeah, Open Directory, kind of, there it is, and that's kind of expected behavior in some situations.
Now, this is a serious question. Did you try restarting?
I did.
Okay.
I did. That's the easy, quick start, especially when you're trying to help someone remotely. But nothing worked. And actually, we did have to restart a second time because although we got it up and running, SMB was not authenticating. So we had some PCs connecting to the server, and SMB was not working. And I even tried, because this used to happen in older versions where we had to stop and start the SMB service, but in the command line. So we had to do sudo server admin, stop SMB, and then start SMB. And oftentimes that would kickstart it. But even that
would work every time. I think a listener may have contributed a script, Dave Provine, that would just do exactly what you just said. It would stop and start SMB, and we scripted it to happen at like midnight on a Sunday or something like that, and problem solved. So
Right. That's just funny. But some of that stuff hasn't happened in a while to me. And then all of a sudden, all these gremlins are back,
Right. Wow.
And on the master, are you running Bender, I hope.
Yes, I love Bender, man. That thing rocks. But yeah, we're cloning them. We're Time Machine backing them up. We're running Bender. We were safe in case anything catastrophic was happening. So it's I guess it's kind of rare, but something that big when I have I think it was 18 users that can't connect, you get really nervous in that situation. But because of all that, I was feeling kind of okay. I'm going, we're going to get this, even if it's a worst case scenario. And that's rare. Sometimes you run into a client where like, crap, I know the backup's probably not up to date or something's wrong, or
Right.
That was one of those where I'm like, all right, no worries. I got this no matter what.
Yeah, it does make you sweat though, because you're just thinking like there's 18 people there and they're all like, probably a little annoyed with me, especially the people who pay the bills, and you're like, immediately start sweating, and it's like, I know the data's okay, but like these people are sitting there and they're waiting for me to figure this out. So
Right, exactly.
yeah, it's a tough spot.
But then you can be the hero.
Yeah, definitely, and glad that worked out for you too. I have a quick PSA. Speaking of silent failures, like your Open Directory issue there, I've noticed with El Capitan that moving mailboxes and mail to a server is especially glitchy. It's always kind of been a little bit of a dicey scenario. Like if a client who has a POP account is migrating to an IMAP, and you want to kind of give them a good experience, you want to put a lot of their sent items in inbox at least. If not some more mailboxes, you want to put that stuff on the server. We all know, maybe do like a chunk of them at a time, and maybe do it by date so you can kind of know where to pick up when, where you left off in case it fails. And usually when it fails, it would give you an error, like, unable to move, X number of messages or something like that. So at least, there was a problem, and you kind of figure out, okay, let me just resume and try this again. But I've noticed that in El Capitan mail, when it fails to copy messages, it just fails and doesn't tell you. It just doesn't work. I don't know if that's been your experience, but I have a client that has probably the most intricate hierarchy of folders I've ever seen, and just the largest sheer volume of messages.
Would you say it's a festival of nested folders?
It's definitely a festival. Absolutely. I'm just imagining party hats and streamers and just, to me, it looks like a huge mess, but it's very well organized from his perspective, but it's not the way I do mail. I dump it all into an archive and I search, that's the way I do things. And in his case, he's got everything, nested into this company, and then this kind of like area of focus, and then like this project, and then inside this project, vendors and clients. And so it's like really, really nested. So he wants to, first of all, the backstory is we were having tons of issues with mail just freezing, going back to 10.10.2, I think. Like when 10.10.2 came out, he installed the update and started having immediate mail issues. Just mail would just pinwheel, just freeze.
Gee, that's unusual.
Well, again,
Sense your sarcasm, Jerry.
I know, right? Well, we've all been there, but this was one of those no amount of troubleshooting seemed to have any effect whatsoever. And when it failed, there was nothing in the log relating to a specific message. There was nothing in the activity viewer. There were no clues. It would just randomly fail. And I finally narrowed it down to one specific account. The problem was it was happening. I set up that one account on a test machine, totally blank slate test machine, running the same OS version 10.10.2, and experienced the same exact behavior. So it was clearly something to do with the server. So my solution was, let's move all the mail off the server, this entire huge hierarchy, move it to the local folders and test my theory. And of course, then mail was stable for months and everything was fine. And he wanted to move stuff back to the server. So I said, let's maybe do this slowly, piece by piece, or
right.
And his problem was it's look at it, and we kind of looked at it together, and it's there's really no simple version of this that we can put on the server. It's just it's extremely intricate. So we just kind of dumped it all back on the server, and it worked. It's actually been fine since then, but there were multiple occasions where it would just it's finished copying, everything's fine, there's no more activity, but you go in and you look, and it's it left off somewhere 2/3 of the way through the folder structure. And you kind of have to hunt for that and then figure out where it left off, and then, manually fill in the gaps. So yeah, nightmare. So be aware of that, because even if it doesn't give you an error, just it may not have actually worked.
That's a great tip and great pitfall that you could, assuming that everything made the transition over, and all of a sudden your client calls you and asks you where's the rest of her mail.
Right.
His mail. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where you begin to rely on software, to work as expected, even with its quirks. Like, we're joking about mail having these glitches and failing to copy and stuff like that. But at least it would tell you, and you kind of learn to like, well, if I don't see a failure, it's probably okay. But if you want to be 100% sure, you really have to, spot check it or check. At least the thing I noticed was it does work alphabetically. So you can find, a failure, and that's a clear point where it left off, and you can continue down, the structure alphabetically. But the other example of this, oddly enough, is our old standby, a carbon copy cloner. I had an issue where it silently failed. Granted, it was a failing drive, but usually carbon copy cloner has been really, really good about copying all the data, even going back and like making other attempts. And it's had an extremely good track record to the point where we just trust it implicitly. But I had an issue where we did a clone from a, failing drive to a new drive, and it finished. It said there were errors. There was like one file listed or something that failed. But we looked at the end result, and the end result was the pictures folder and the movies folder had like do not enter symbols. Like they were just, there was no data and the folder was locked. So that was really disconcerting because it had actually completed like the rest of the hierarchy past that stuff. So it wasn't like it left off there and stopped working. It somehow progressed past those folders, did the rest of the clone, thought it was successful, and the end result was it was missing in this case, probably the most important data, the pictures, but dozens of gigabytes of it. So very, very concerning. Turns out it was just a bug in 4.1.3, and we updated to 4.1.6, and it fixed it. So
did the bug have anything to do with those specific directories, or just a bug where it would silently skip stuff?
That I don't know. But I did have a case subsequent to that where it was something similar where it also completed, didn't give any errors, and it was not a complete clone. Like it was, 60 gigs and it should have been 110 or something like that. And I checked again, and sure enough, I was out of date. I mean, this is my fault for not updating Carbon Copy Cloner. But it's just one of those things where if you get really comfortable with software to the point where you trust it like 100% implicitly, you kind of still have to have like a sanity check built in to really be sure. So not to speak against Carbon Copy Cloner, I still love it. I mean, I so appreciate the work that Mike Bombick does and everybody on his team. But it's more of a PSA to like keep your tools up to date and to check stuff.
Right. No, it's a smart move. I mean, yes, I can't even speak highly enough about CCC, but those little things of finding out after the fact, that happened to me with something with Deploy Studio when we were creating images. We had an issue where computers weren't binding to Active Directory, and lo and behold, it was just a simple update. But, if you don't check that stuff ahead of time, as we should be doing, right. You might catch yourself in a hole.
Yeah, in our case, we ran, a second pass and a third pass, and we're like, what's going on? Like, what's wrong with these folders? The data is there on the source. We can read it from the source. It looks good. Like, luckily, it's there. So we kind of like did a Finder copy real quick to make sure we could get the stuff. And and finally, it was like our third thing. We checked the version and we realized, it's out of date. And sure enough, I don't think it did reference something along these lines. I'm not sure if this was a specific issue it fixed, but no problem. They ran the next pass and it got everything. So yeah, definitely worth checking.
Yeah, just never make assumptions, always check. I do that, where I really check sometimes is if I'm going to nuke somebody's calendar in iCal, the calendar program, if I do exports of their calendar before I blow everything away, I always do it to get info on what I've exported to make sure there's been data there, because I think I've been bitten by that, where I've selected a calendar, I've done an export to the desktop, and then it was like 0 kilobytes. It's always good to, this doesn't quite apply, but, measure twice, cut once.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, man.
I had a very odd little PSA. I was trying to mount a WebDAV and couldn't do it for the life of me, and yet I could mount the WebDAV through my browser. And I was doing a cut and paste in Command K, connect to a server from the desktop. For some reason, it just wouldn't. I wouldn't get the credentials to mount the WebDAV folder. And what happened was when I was doing the cut and paste using the Command K, connect to server, there was a hidden character there, a hidden return that was preventing the WebDAV from mounting, but yet it wasn't manifesting itself when I pasted that same link into the browser.
Huh.
Is that weird?
Yeah.
I've actually noticed that in Safari, if you paste, you can have that extra like space at the beginning or space at the end, or I'm not sure about the space at the end, but I've definitely noticed it with the space at the beginning and like something trailing where it does some smart things to like, it realizes you're just trying to paste a URL. You probably grab some extra characters and it fixes it, when you paste it in and load the site. But that's an interesting observation that it doesn't, obviously the Command K connect to server window doesn't have that same feature built in.
Intelligence built into it, right? So as soon as I manually typed in the URL, boom, it mounted.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Wow.
but I was chasing my tail there for about 48 hours.
Wow.
I hate that. And then you find there was something really small. You're like, don't.
Yeah.
No.
We've all been there.
I had to bring one thing up to you guys that's been plaguing me it's one of those situations where you can't wait to talk about it on the show kind of thing, because it's small, but I wanted to see if you had any theories on this, because it's the most bizarre behavior. I was working at a client and I was remoting in from one of their workstations to their server, which happened to be in their server room down in the basement, and there wasn't easy access to it. So I was working on the server and performing tasks like using Profile Manager and doing different things. And all of a sudden, everything acted as if the shift key was held down. Like if you minimize something in the dock, it would go really slow or, perform stuff like that. So I'm thinking, what the hell's going on? So my first reaction was, can you go talk to somebody in the server room, see if they placed like, an external hard drive on top of the keyboard, something stupid like that. So that wasn't it. And then the issue started to manifest itself on the user account itself, like on the local computer. The same exact behavior started to happen. I restarted. I reset PRAM. I did all these little funky things. Then I was like, all right, this is not working. Let me just try a different account. So I try another account, and the problem goes away, and I'm working for maybe 15 minutes. As soon as, and I didn't realize this till afterwards, but once I started doing another ARD session, about 5 or 10 minutes later, the issue came back again. And again, it started out on the remote session and then equaled out on the local session as well. And this was a brand new user that I just created. So the only thing I could think of, which doesn't even make any sense, is that once that ARD session started, that behavior came about. That's what kind of we boiled it down to. But I've never seen anything like it. It was the stupidest thing. I switched keyboards, by the way, on the local computer, just in case anyone had that option in the back of their head. But nothing. I could not figure out anything to make that go away.
Interesting. And if you quit out of ARD, it still did it.
Yeah, it still did it. And then if I restarted it, it was pretty good for a little while. And then it came back after a bit. And I just gave up.
So this is still happening. So you basically have, what's the solution when it happens? You have to quit.
I had to restart.
Oh, God.
And try a different user account, and then it was good for a little while. But again, this doesn't happen normally from this workstation to ARD. So I was like, you know what? I can deal with this for now. It was the instructor workstation in a classroom. And if you didn't do that, the computer worked just fine. So I left it.
So it's definitely ARD related.
It seems to be, but it was weird that it started in the remote session and then came over to the local desktop.
Even after quitting ARD.
Yeah. Yeah, then it stuck.
Really weird. Wow.
Yeah, because sometimes you have weirdness on the client machine if you haven't quit out of ARD on the machine you were controlling it on.
So weird, man. And I don't know any. I'm like, I give up.
Is there anything weird about the keyboard on the workstation you're controlling the server from?
That's why I swapped out a keyboard with another computer.
Gotcha, on that one.
I tried that. I tried swapping the keyboard on the server downstairs, which didn't seem to make sense since it happened locally. But I was just like, you know what? I'm done. I'm going to remote in. I had TeamViewer from my computer. I remoted in that way. Everything worked fine. I got my job done. I'm like, I got to get out of here. I'm done.
Maybe you should schedule a session at the Genius Bar.
Yes, yeah. I'll log in. They have one of the cheese grater Mac Pros. I'll just lug that in.
That's funny.
So yeah, that was my world.
That's a weird one. The gears are turning. Nothing's coming to mind, but that's.
I'm really hoping that this goes out to the world and some guy listening to this show goes, oh man, I got something for Sam. I'm going to email him. I would love to hear from somebody on this.
Run this terminal command.
Yes, exactly.
Or some beta version of the OS or something like that fixes it. I'm suspicious of the com.apple. Is it keyboard.plist? on either side. I don't know which side, the server side or the control side, but also the some of those settings for modifier keys and whatnot. Yeah, be real curious about that.
And by the way, this was a completely fresh install of El Cap on the client computer that I was remoting from. So it's not like it had like 3-year-old problems that just came to life.
Right.
Wow.
So I got nothing.
Very interesting. Well, stay tuned for more on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bong.
Bong.
Bong. Nice.
It's good. It's good.
It's good.
It's good.
My dog's whining to get out of my office anyway.
All right. I get the family champing at the bit. Do you know it's champing at the bit?
Champing. Yeah, I've read that.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. They're at the door.
Mind blown.
I know. Because that's what a horse does when it has the bit in its mouth. It's champing. It's not chomping.
That's weird.
That's weird.
I know.